Virus cases are on the rise in China. Shanghai Disneyland reportedly tested all of its more than 30,000 visitors Sunday night after a person carrying the virus visited the park. And they weren't allowed to leave until the results came back negative. In one Beijing district, locals are lining up en masse for virus testing. It's the same area home to the official residence and workplace of the Communist Party's leader. Every traffic light in one county is locked on red, while every person in one city is labeled risky. Those are just some of the extreme control measures Communist China has adopted to combat the pandemic. Action by China shows apparent disinterest in tackling climate issues. The absence of its state head at the climate-focused G20 summit proved a disappointment, including for U.S. President Joe Biden. And U.S. retail giants are set to remove some Chinese security cameras. The devices have been linked to human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Hello and welcome to China in Focus. I'm Evelyn Lee in for Tiffany today. And Shanghai Disneyland virus tested all 33,000 of its visitors Sunday evening. That's after authorities discovered an individual carrying the Chinese Communist Party virus that causes COVID-19 had visited the park. For hours, tens of thousands of families were stuck inside the theme park. They weren't allowed to leave until negative test results came back. And the resort was also surrounded by virus prevention personnel. China follows what it calls a zero-case policy when it comes to its approach to handling the pandemic. That means that when just one confirmed case is found, everyone in the area will be put under strict quarantine or lockdown or made to get tested. Unlike China, many other countries have instead loosened their restrictions and don't employ such harsh measures. But in Shanghai, Disneyland is now closed until further notice. And Beijing just started the 100-day countdown to the Winter Olympics last week, but the pandemic is causing a lot of concern. The CCP virus may have spread to the most important location in China, the area housing the central headquarters of the Chinese Communist Party, or Zhongnanhai in Beijing. And that's despite authorities' strict virus prevention and control measures. After new virus cases were reported in Beijing, authorities are implementing shutdowns and mandatory virus testing for locals. In the district where Zhongnanhai is located, all theaters are closed, and all performances and screenings are canceled. Meanwhile, close to Zhongnanhai in the Forbidden City area, locals are lining up en masse for virus testing. Chinese state leaders, including Xi Jinping and other top CCP officials, carry out many of their administrative activities in Zhongnanhai. The term is often analogous with the CCP leadership, in the same sense that the term White House refers to the U.S. executive branch. And all across China, authorities are sealing off roads, locking down communities, and virus testing residents en masse. This is over a dozen provinces report new virus cases. NTD's Don Ma reports.
China is pulling out all the stops to try to contain a fresh wave of virus outbreaks across the country. A spokesman for China's National Health Commission said on Saturday that 14 provinces, municipalities, and regions confirmed new cases over the past week. According to state-owned broadcaster CCTV, thousands of tourists visiting China's Inner Mongolia region have been sent to hotels for 2 weeks of quarantine. Yichun Banner is one of the hardest-hit cities there. It's currently classified as a high-risk area. More than 2,000 tourists have been sent to a neighboring city for possible self-isolation, where nearly 20 hotels are being prepared for their arrival. The affected areas are also undergoing rounds of mass virus testing, and authorities are closing off roads. Those are some of the measures being taken in Henan Province, Jiangxi Province, and Hebei Province. Video posted shows residents lining up for virus testing in the middle of the night, and long lines of traffic as roads are blocked. In Yangshan, a county in China's Jiangxi Province, authorities organized overnight mass testing after reporting just one new infection on Saturday. They aim to test all of the area's nearly 40,000 residents within 2 days. And in China's Heilongjiang province, the city of Harbin reported its first case in months on Saturday. That's according to state reports. The city has since imposed lockdown measures on all residential communities that the patient and their close contacts recently visited. Don Ma, NTD News.
Officials are implementing extreme CCP virus control measures in various provinces as a new wave of infection strikes China. China's northeastern city or Heihe recently fell victim to another outbreak. The local authorities announced on Saturday that as long as a person is registered with a household in the city, no matter where they go, their health code will change to yellow, meaning their mobility and ability to gather with others is restricted. And they're not allowed in certain public venues such as bus stations, cinemas, schools, hotels. A Twitter user says his neighbor's household registration is in Heihe City, but he hasn't been there for 3 years. Still, that neighbor's health code turned yellow due to the regulation. A local community worker came and sealed the neighbor's door, forcing them to quarantine for 14 days. The regulation knows it may cause trouble to those who don't live in Heihe City and says if that's the case, they can call a hotline or apply online to change their health code back to green. Many have tried, but they say no one answered the phone, and online applications seem to go nowhere. And also on Saturday, another extreme regulation was announced in a southeast Chinese county called Yanshan. The local traffic bureau published a notice saying all traffic lights in the county will stay red to meet the needs of pandemic control, and added starting 9 p.m. the same day, all vehicles running red lights will be fined for violation. The regulation triggered heated discussion online. A comment says, "In the name of political correctness, all bad things will be done." That's the caprice and arrogance of one-party dictatorship. They don't care about people. A day later, the Traffic Bureau revoked the regulation and said no one got punished. Now, another even more strict control measure is on the way. According to media reports, multiple places in China will adopt a new measure called space-time overlap. All areas will be divided into grids covering a quarter of a square mile. That's about 6 or 7 blocks wide in New York City. Anyone who stays in this same grid for more than 10 minutes with a confirmed positive case in the past 2 weeks will be considered to be committing space-time overlap. Soon, space-time overlap developed an upgraded version called Space-Time Accompany. In that version, even the overlap caused by cell phone signal drifts counts. And in both cases, the person's health code will turn from green to yellow. And that code holder is then forbidden to access some public places. Another round of disputes over the origin of the pandemic. A declassified U.S. intelligence report calls it plausible that the virus originated in a laboratory. But Beijing labeled the statement as unscientific and without credibility. Here's more.
China called a new declassified U.S. intelligence report on COVID-19 unscientific on Sunday. The report claimed the pandemic could have possibly originated in a lab. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said in a statement, quote, "A lie repeated 1,000 times is still a lie." The U.S. briefing published earlier in the weekend said a lab leak in China was just as plausible an explanation as a natural origin theory to explain how COVID-19 first infected humans, but also that the truth may never be known. China has consistently denied allegations its virology lab in Wuhan was the source of the first outbreak, first identified at the end of 2019. A joint study by China and the World Health Organization published this year said COVID-19 most likely infected humans via the wildlife trade, and all but ruled out a lab leak theory. But critics have said the study failed to investigate the Wuhan labs. The WHO established a new group last month to study the pandemic's origins and called on China to supply raw data to help the new investigation. China declined, citing patient privacy rules.
A new U.S. intelligence report reveals new details about the government's stance on the pandemic. It says more intelligence agencies support the view of the pandemic beginning naturally than the possibility of it leaking from a lab. But due to a lack of key information, no theory can currently be proven. According to the report, if the virus did come from a lab, it was likely an accident that caused the leak, and that researchers in the Wuhan lab probably were not aware of its existence at the time. Earlier this year, the World Health Organization criticized Beijing for withholding key data collected in the early days of the pandemic in Wuhan. What's more, the new report says Beijing will likely continue blocking a global investigation into the virus's origin. In the conclusion of the report, U.S. intelligence agencies say they may never be able to identify the origins of COVID-19. Beijing, the world's leading emitter of greenhouse gases, has turned down 2 climate talks. The G20 summit in Rome over the weekend offered little news on efforts to curb emissions. and Beijing's absence prompts skepticism on whether it would follow its climate agreements.
On Sunday, world leaders wrapped up the G20 summit with a final statement about tackling climate issues. But activists criticized it, saying it offered few concrete commitments. And they weren't the only ones disappointed.
And there's a reason why people should be disappointed in that. I found it disappointing myself.
Speaking after the G20 summit in Rome, U.S. President Biden laid blame on China and Russia.
Not only Russia, but China basically didn't show up in terms of any commitments to deal with climate change.
Over the weekend, leaders of the world's 20 richest economies met at a summit in Rome for their first face-to-face meeting in 2 years, all to discuss plans to curb environmental issues. Together, their nations account for 80% of global carbon emissions, and China easily tops that list. That means the world's climate goals largely depend on the nation's actions in the near future. As all eyes were on Beijing during the G20 summit and the United Nations climate talks this week, known as COP26. But its proposals didn't appear at either of the events. China's communist leader Xi Jinping participated in the G20 summit via a video link, but said he won't address the COP26 in person or video. He'll send a note instead. Analysts say his absence at both talks could indicate Beijing has no more concessions to offer after major pledges last year. Last year, Xi said China planned for an emissions peak in 2030 and promised to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. But this time, speaking via video link on Saturday, Xi said developed countries should lead on global emissions. He added they should shoulder their due responsibilities in the global economic recovery from the pandemic. Despite being the world's second largest economy and highest carbon emissions, China remains a developing country based on UN criteria.
I think you're going to see we've made significant progress, and more has to be done. But it's going to require us to continue to focus on what China's not doing, what Russia's not doing, and what Saudi Arabia is not doing.
According to a Washington Post report, Biden has privately questioned whether China and other top polluters would deliver on the climate pledge. While on the G20 sidelines in Rome, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi as part of the G20 summit on Sunday. They greeted each other without touching before the meeting. At the meeting, they both traded warnings against moves concerning Taiwan. Wang blamed U.S. support for what he called Taiwan independence forces for the uptick in tensions. He also called on the U.S. to pursue a real one-China policy instead of a so-called fake one, accusing the U.S. side of saying one thing and doing another. While Blinken made it, quote, crystal clear that the U.S. opposes any unilateral action by Beijing regarding Taiwan, China claims the island as part of its own territory and views any foreign intervention as interference in its domestic affairs. The U.S. does not openly contest China's claim to Taiwan, though it is obliged to ensure the island can defend itself and to take with any threats made toward the island seriously.
The Taliban wants to be recognized by other countries, but China likely won't be the first. This according to an expert from an official think tank in China. Over the weekend, the Taliban called on the U.S. and other countries to recognize their government in Afghanistan. That recognition would also lead to unfreezing billions of dollars of Afghan funds abroad. But what if other countries don't agree to the regime's request? The Taliban says that would lead to problems not only for those countries, but also for the world. Since the Taliban took power in Afghanistan in the summer, Beijing has offered a lot of help. The Taliban spokesman says China promised to finance transport infrastructure in the country and give Afghans exports access to Chinese markets. And while no country has recognized the Taliban government, senior officials from some countries, including China, have met with the group. China's foreign minister met Taliban officials in Qatar last week, and he said that Taliban is eager to have dialogue with the outside world and that the international community should help Afghanistan develop. And the next foreign ministers' meeting of Afghan neighbors will take place in China next year. This according to an announcement from the communist regime on its official website. Yet, as friendly as those relations are, China won't be the first country to recognize the Taliban as a legitimate regime in Afghanistan. A director at an official think tank of the Chinese national security told Reuters earlier that China will act in accordance with Pakistan, Russia, and Iran. A couple of U.S. retail giants will reportedly no longer sell Chinese security cameras that have been linked to human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Best Buy, Home Depot, and Lowe's are removing Lorix and Easvisk security cameras from their stores because of the product's links to surveillance in the Xinjiang region. This, according to American online newspaper TechCrunch. In a statement, Home Depot told the outlet it's committed to upholding the highest standards of ethical sourcing. Best Buy said it would discontinue its relationship with the two companies. Lowe's also removed Lorix from its store. Lorix was based in Canada until 3 years ago when it was sold to Chinese company Dahua. And Easvis is a company based in the U.S., but it's a division of Hikvision, a manufacturer of video surveillance products in China's Hangzhou city. Both Chinese companies have reportedly supplied the surveillance cameras that monitor the Uyghur ethnic minority in Xinjiang. And the U.S. blacklisted them under Trump's administration. The United Nations says that the Chinese regime has detained over 1 million Uyghurs in labor camps. Taiwan received 1.5 million doses of the Moderna vaccine from the U.S. government on Monday. Officials from the U.S. and Taiwan were at the airport in Taoyuan to welcome the shipment. Taiwan's health minister and the director of the American Institute in Taiwan, or AIT, were among them. AIT performs the functions of a U.S. embassy in Taiwan. It said in a statement, the Institute's director said, "The value of our partnership and our support for Taiwan is rock solid. We're committed to deepening our ties with Taiwan." And she said the U.S. considers peace in the Taiwan Strait to be central to security in the Indo-Pacific region and for the United States, adding the U.S. is deeply concerned by Communist China's efforts to undermine stability in the region. AIT describes the vaccine donation as a concrete example of the U.S. government's deep and broad ties with Taiwan. And this isn't the first such donation. Back in June, the U.S. government donated 2.5 million doses of the Moderna vaccine to Taiwan. And now we turn to Hong Kong. Media tycoon and pro-democracy advocate Jimmy Lai will face trial in a Hong Kong court on Monday. He and 7 others are accused of an unauthorized assembly over a banned Tiananmen vigil last year. The vigil had been held annually to mark the anniversary of a bloody crackdown in 1989 when military troops quashed student-led pro-democracy protests in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Last year, Hong Kong authorities banned the vigil for the first time in 3 decades, citing public health risks. But critics believe the ban is part of the crackdown by Beijing. Despite the ban, more than a dozen activists turned up at the vigil last year, and thousands followed suit. Police later arrested and charged 26 activists over the vigil. On Monday, as the trial began, 5 of the group pleaded guilty to the incitement charges. Lai, the founder of the now-defunct pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily, and 2 others pleaded not guilty. Apple Daily was forced to close earlier this July after police froze its accounts, raided its offices, and arrested top editors. The court has set a 10-day estimate for the trial. We're seeing more effects from Beijing's clampdown on the education sector in China. A well-known tutoring company in eastern China's city of Nanjing closed 4 campuses since last month. It owes $6 million to parents, affecting thousands of families. Parents have been protesting at the company's office and on campus. Since July, more than 1,200 tutoring companies in China have gone bankrupt. Beijing's clampdown isn't limited to the education sector. It includes real estate, the platform economy, online finance, and cryptocurrency, plus tech companies' IPOs, and even cloud computing. The latest on the list is the entertainment industry, video game companies, and celebrity fan clubs. Analysts believe the Chinese Communist Party is concerned that private economies and celebrities are gaining too much influence and fear that could threaten the power of the regime. The European Parliament needs to confront the Chinese regime on its forced organ harvesting atrocities, a Dutch lawmaker said on Wednesday.
Peter van Dalen pointed out that the last time the Parliament acted on the issue was in 2013, when it adopted a resolution condemning organ transplant abuse in China. He told a conference on organ harvesting in Brussels such inaction was unacceptable. Van Dalen said a major factor for the EU's silence has been its close economic relations with China. In June 2019, an independent tribunal in London said that the Chinese regime has been killing prisoners of conscience for their organs on a significant scale, and that the principal victim group has been adherents of the Falun Gong spiritual practice. Van Dalen said a hearing on the topic may take place in the coming months.
And that's it for today's episode of China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.